Hi, this is Paul Zelizer, and welcome to another episode of the Awarepreneurs podcast. This podcast is all about the intersection of three things: conscious business, social impact, and awareness practices. Each episode, I do a deep dive interview with a thought leader in this intersection, someone who has market-tested experience and is already transforming many lives. Before I introduce today's guests and our topic, I have one request. If you could go over to Apple Podcasts or whatever app you're listening to the show on and hit the subscribe button and do a review, it helps tremendously. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Zack Hurley, and our topic is inclusion and sustainable fashion. Zack Hurley, the co-founder and CEO of IndieSource, is an entrepreneur and motivator with experience working with both private and public sector organizations. He was recently announced to Forbes 30 Under 30 and Apparel Mag's Top 30 Under Elite. Zack, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
We're called Awarepreneurs, Zack, and one of the ways we like to get to know somebody is to ask you about a wellness or an awareness practice that you personally use to bring your best self to work day after day, week after week.
Yeah, sure. So probably the most important one for me is a set of corrective exercises that I do in the morning. I met a guy named Kai Taylor in Posture Movement out of LA, and he taught me about how the body is usually not in alignment. And when the body's not in alignment, all sorts of chaos can happen. And I learned from this guy basically how to put myself back straight. And what I learned is that not only does that help me from a physical perspective, but it also puts me in a great headspace. So every day I do these set of exercises that make sure that my body feels good and that I'm in a good headspace as well.
You hear a lot of people talk about alignment in conscious business. You're literally talking about alignment.
Literally stacking my hips and making sure that I'm not doing anything that's hurting myself. And from there, the foundation is set, and you can move on to other things.
Cool. So you've got this fabulous company called IndieSource, and your whole thing is about sustainable fashion. Like, how did you get into that passion? And give our listeners who, may or may not have some sense of like, what's the state of fashion? Maybe unsustainable fashion. Is that not kind of the norm in the industry?
It definitely is. And we are at a turning point too. So, I mean, as anybody who's looked at the news has seen that there are fashion businesses that are going bankrupt left and right. And part of the reason that that's happened is because of the model that it exists under. And that model is one of overproduction and just like completely ignoring anything having to do with like what the effects are. And, what happens is that these companies are so over leveraged. They're making so much product. They're appealing to such huge parts of the market. And when something happens like the COVID, it just takes a huge hit on them. And they have so much overhead, which leaves room for a set of very tenacious, hungry entrepreneurs that see problems in the industry and they want to fill it. And so what I do, what IndieSource does, is we support emerging fashion entrepreneurs that are looking to get into the space and have a specific niche in mind. A lot of the brands come in and they want to be a part of the solution. So we're sourcing sustainable fabrics for them. We are helping to source materials and labor that's sustainable, making sure that there's an ethical component to it. We produce in small batches rather than producing tons of units that may not sell. And we also produce close to where they're being sold. So oftentimes production is done overseas in Asia. It's then shipped a million different places and ultimately ends up in the United States. And so we're trying to build localized supply chains in a way that is just much more sustainable. You don't have stuff sitting on a boat traveling the planet to ultimately get back to the US.
Why fashion? Like you're doing so many cool things, Zack, and I want to get into I don't want to just touch skim. I want to go deeper. But before we talk about, why you try to do as much production as you can in LA and what about your fabrics? Why fashion? Why does Zack Hurley have such a passion for the fashion industry?
I have to be honest about that part. Like, I think I fell into that, and I mostly fell in love with the problem. And if at the beginning, and then through time, I sort of fell in love with fashion. Does that make sense? Like, you sort of fall in love with something when you put enough hours into it. And so now, having so many hours, I've been doing this for about 8 years of just like pure work and hustle and working on this business, that like I understand fashion on a different level. And so I think that was something that has transformed for me. But what has always been there is just kind of been the desire to like solve a problem, to create a business, and to support other people that I know are capable of like bringing their ideas to life. And simply knowing that like I have the team and the tools to help them do that. So like I have to get this thing out there.
We talked before we hit the record button, Zack, and I think that one of my senses is it's such a mess in the talking world. You're like, look at all these problems. Like, we make much too stuff and then we throw it out, and look at the way, the dyes, and it's like made in China and then imported. This is a freaking mess. I want to do something about this. Right? Is that fair to say? It's something like that?
Exactly. No, it's a total mess, man. It's a total mess. And part of the reason it was a mess is because you have, in the beginning, you just have these giant companies that are selling to the whole country. They have all of the market share, right? And so they're just trying to produce as much as they can, and none of it really fits either. It's kind of like, it
doesn't look good. It wears out really fast. They make too much market.
Of it. So that's what we're trying to move away from. And the market's demanding that. They're demanding, just like in food, they're demanding to know what they're putting in their body. They want to know what they're putting on their body. They want to know how it's being sourced. And the other model is, that's due to the fact that people can communicate directly with their customers now. So before, if you didn't have a store or a department store, how are you going to reach the people you want to sell your product to? But now it's completely different. So now we have a way for people who have a specific message, or they have a social cause or something that they're trying to accomplish through products, to reach out to people that are part of that tribe and to build a community around it.
So you look at this industry and you're just like, both how it's produced and the way it's sold. There's just this is really broken. This is broken.
It's a dinosaur industry. But genuinely, that's what got me excited about it. I was like, this is the dinosaur industry. I was like, because the tech industry, like, okay, so that's moving along. But then you look at apparel and you're like, they're stuck in the 50s in a lot of cases. Now, of course, there's lots of new companies coming out, but generally anybody in apparel will tell you, like, the way things are done in the manufacturing industry are very old school. And when I started IndieSource, I couldn't even find manufacturers that had a website. I mean, let alone like being able to use credit cards. They like would want faxes, and I kid you not, this is the most insane stuff.
So you say, all right, here's an opportunity to do some serious disruption for good. Right. And all right, so now let's chunk it down. So you see this industry, it's a mess, and let's start going kind of piece by piece here. One of the ways it's a mess is in like where it's produced. Talk to us about like where are most clothes made that are currently sold in the United States? And what's it like in those communities?
Yeah, the vast majority of clothing that's sold, let me put it, less than 2% of all of the clothing that is sold in the United States is made in the United States.
2%?
Yeah. So everything else is made overseas. And, obviously China is huge, but, they're transitioning to lower cost countries. And so although it did originally move to China, since then, as those costs rose, it's just been this like silly game of let's just find the country that has the cheapest labor. So it goes from China, then it goes to Vietnam, then it goes to Bangladesh, and so it bounces around these other areas, ultimately not putting these communities in a better position, but ultimately kind of like trying to increase profits as much as possible. And if you just look logistically, what has to happen is you have to ship it on a boat across the planet. You have to guess how much units you're going to sell because you don't know. You're doing it so far in advance. And so it's not a sustainable business. I mean, every single aspect of the traditional apparel manufacturing model is bad for the environment.
What's it like if you live in a place where clothes are made in a traditional way? You live in one of these manufacturing cities in China or Vietnam or Bangladesh. And yeah, what's the impact of these clothes? Let's stay with made for, let's say most of our listeners are either in North America or Europe, right? But they're made in these places that we just talked about. What's life like on the ground there?
It's not great, and part of the problem, and there's two aspects to it. One is just what is the cost of doing it so far away and then shipping it all around the world, and then the other thing is more of a human element, which is like, what is the cost of the fact that you have no idea what's going on in that factory, and what is it really like? And so, I mean, a lot of this stuff has come out, but I mean, and I recommend people watching the movie The True Cost and getting educated on what happens in factories abroad where there's there's nobody like holding them to a standard, but the other countries have different standards, right? And so there's things that pop up like children working, abuse to the women in the factories. And it's not to say that this is everywhere, but the point is that when you just send it to some other country and you just take the cheapest labor, there's going to be a cost. And oftentimes it's a cost on the human element and somebody who is in a very, very bad situation. And so that's the problem with just saying, oh, I'm just going to go to China, but you have no idea what's actually happening when you ship it over there.
We're talking, harassment. There's even been, deaths in factory fires. And
exactly. Rana Plaza is a huge thing that happened a number of years ago where in Bangladesh, where the whole building collapsed because they didn't take care of the infrastructure. Nobody paid attention to it. And these are factories that are working for well-known brands that the majority of the country and everybody in the country knows about and many people wear, big box stores. And it's just, it gets out of hand when you're dealing with these companies that are so huge. And so part of what I want to do, it's like we need to democratize the whole thing. We have to make it so that there's not so many massive corporations and portfolio companies that own the entire market share. It needs to be democratized and spread out so that more people have more control over the market and decide what it's going to mean for us. And so if we can do that, then it just puts us in a position to make the change that we want, basically.
And so we have all these terrible ripple effects of doing business in this way in the places and for the people who are actually making the clothes in the cities where the factories are located. And then in talking with you, aha moment, but I hadn't thought about it before. It's like the clothes don't even work for the people who buy them. They're cheap, but they don't fit well if you're not a standard sizing. Talk to us a little bit about some of the issues there and the lack of inclusion in terms of who clothes are currently made for.
Yeah, I mean, clothes are made originally for the mass market, and that leaves out so many people. And so what does that do? I mean, the ripple effects are huge. It creates self-confidence issues. People just don't want to go shopping. And so if you just think about our country and how many different kinds of people that are out there, I mean, it's the majority of the clothing at your basic store is not going to have what they need. And so what we're seeing is now an opportunity for people who want to be a part of that solution to raise their hand and say, you know what, I want to make clothing for plus size women who just go to the store and just never find what they need, right? I want to make clothing for guys that are shorter or bigger or this or tall or fat, skinny. It doesn't matter. Something that they're not getting, right, is not in the market, and they want to create something different for themselves. And that's what's really kind of cool to me is that's going to come from entrepreneurs like your listeners. I mean, people that just see a problem and want to create a solution and know that they can make it and sell it directly to the people who would really be happy about receiving it.
And so on every level, listeners, you start to get a sense the current way clothes are done, it's harmful to the people and the communities that they're made in. These incredible environmental costs. We're talking about shipping things around the world, or just the fabrics that they're made themselves and the dyes and the way the cotton is grown, or et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't fit a large majority of people if you're shorter than average or heavier than what, the standard person who's designing clothes is thinking about who they have in mind, or if somebody's an amputee or they're in a wheelchair, right? All these different, there's so many ways it's not working. So
yeah, we've done like a lot of medical apparel, which I didn't know we would do, right? In the beginning, that never crossed my mind. But we got so many inquiries, people like, all right, I have this particular condition and I want to make a product that helps other people. Like, yeah. I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Like, we're not just making like apparel, like we're making like some super functional thing that like allows you to put your IV through it and like without taking your shirt off. And like, oh, okay. Now we're really making really unique products that are solving problems.
So from sustainability and the earth issues, environmental issues, to like the way there's blind spots about who wears clothes. I mean, it's kind of like obvious, but humans are really diverse, and the people who are making clothes have had some incredible biases about who they've had in mind. So enter IndieSource, right? So you get a sense, you can go check out the website, and we could spend the whole time talking about all the problems. I want to get to the solution, but I wanted to give a sense of like why this is such a ripe space for you guys to come in. Now, one of the things I love, and we're going to get into some specific examples, but the thing that's really interesting about your business model to me, Zack, is you didn't come in and say, we're going to make all these clothes for these different audiences, somebody who's taller than average or heavier than average or has a medical situation, et cetera, et cetera. You said, we're going to help people. All these entrepreneurs are out there who see ways that it doesn't fit for, literally, the clothes don't fit for who's out there in the world. And we want to do something to make it easier for all these entrepreneurs to get up and running. Is that fair description of your basic business model?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's really my passion, and that it's like, how can I synthesize what other people are seeing as these problems, but support them through that part where they're just static? And I think I mentioned to you this before, but most people, I always ask how long you've been thinking about your idea. And most people always say years, not months. It's never months. It's like years. I've been thinking about it for years. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So if everybody is thinking on their idea for years before they take action, think about what kind of impact that is. What if we could move it to months instead of years?
So give us a couple of examples of the entrepreneurs that you've worked with and you're excited. Like, what kinds of things are they bringing to you? And then we'll talk about the ways that you help entrepreneurs like this.
Yeah, sure. All right. So I just talked to a guy, Gage, over at Green Stain, and he's doing sustainable apparel and educating the consumer on what they don't know about water and waste and all sorts of things that go into their products, which is very cool. We work with Wahi Yoga, which is an apparel line that's made out of recycled fabrics and small batch production for them. She just sells direct to consumers, and she's making a whole lifestyle business out of it. Universal Dialect is a brand that we make these sustainable t-shirts for. I think it's Tencel that we used. And for every shirt that they make, they donate soccer balls to kids all around the world, and they travel around the world playing soccer. This guy's a really passionate soccer player, and he's like giving back to the community in that way. We do like a series on our Instagram, IndieSource Presents. So we'll interview some of our clients. Another one was named Lauren Gray. She's doing inclusive women's wear line for folks that have been left out. Another one's Roboro, which is sustainable apparel company. And incidentally, Jillian, the founder, now works with IndieSource. And so it's been really cool because she was inspired in what we do. We're inspired in what she does. And so kind of joined forces, and she's helping other fashion entrepreneurs with their dreams while she builds hers too.
Cool.
So yeah, I got a lot. There's like 500 brands, so there's a lot of examples.
That's awesome. And you also told me one about a medical apparel of somebody who,
I think I told you about Rod Carew, the baseball player.
That's exactly who you told me. Yeah.
So Rod Carew has this heart condition, and basically, it's not that many people that have it, right? It's like pretty specific. But we made this shirt for him that allows him to it's like all this Velcro and like crazy like attachments that allow him to carry all of his medical equipment on his body. So it's like really, really convenient for him. And I'm not, I don't know all the technical terms for it, but he every once in a while puts in an order, sells it, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't know anything about that. So I learned a lot from things like that, and different medical companies that I know are helping a lot of people.
You have over 500 examples, and people can go to your Instagram. We'll put that in the show notes, and you do a whole series. But so our listeners get a sense, right? From medical folks to people who just are bigger than what the average designer is thinking about, or they're shorter or whatever. And these folks have specific issues that they come to IndieSource for. I've got this idea. It's literally been in my head for years. And what are some of the things that they're coming to you for help with?
It's usually everything in terms of making it a reality. So they have the idea, but what do they do first? Okay. And so we know, okay, well, the first step is you have to outline exactly what you want to produce, as well as from a material perspective, and then also the price points. And what we do is we walk them through the stages. We source fabric for them. We make patterns, which is the actual fit of what every garment has. We cut and sew samples. We iterate with them. We work with hundreds of vendors around the LA area that do dyeing and have special elastic and trims and labels. I mean, there's so many aspects to a garment that most people look at it and they don't even notice. The stuff in a collar that makes it thick is actually another fabric. It's called fusing. Most people don't even know that, right? So little things like that we have to source. And so what we want to do is put these entrepreneurs in a position to not wonder what they should do, but to show them an actual plan, and then to give them a team that can do it. And it's not me that is the reason that we're helping them. It's because basically I found the right people and put them together in the right process so that we're all working together. And so project managers that come from more established companies come to work with IndieSource, and then we'll work directly with our entrepreneurs. Pattern makers that have done all sorts of things for other brands now work at IndieSource. Same with sample makers. And so the people on our team are kind of like they're a reflection of the industry. Only instead of working for big mega brands, we're shifting gears and working for the indie fashion entrepreneurs out there. And that's been fun to reestablish that focus.
So cool. I think what you're doing is awesome, Zack. So let's do this. I want to unpack specifically how you work with people and the different services you offer. Before we do that, let's just do a quick break from our sponsor. Awarepreneurs is a community-sponsored podcast. And the way it works with the Awarepreneurs community is if you've got a brand that's about making positive impact in the world, we're here to help you grow. That can be everything from as simple, I was talking to one of our members recently about she needed a logo, some branding, and a website. We have people who work with these kind of brands. We help people do what Zack's doing today, learn how to get on podcasts and help find the right podcast and help get your message out there. It's called the Podcast Success Team. We have 2 LinkedIn pods where we help people who want to use LinkedIn to grow an impact-oriented business. We have an Instagram pod that, again, helps you learn how to use Instagram and grow your business, right? All with folks who are on a similar journey and are incredibly supportive, both on the interior, like what's it like to be an entrepreneur with an idea about making the world a better place, and also on the outside. Here's the real-world steps about how you grow a business and have the income and the lifestyle that you're looking for. So if you could use a little more support reaching your impact goals and reaching your income goals, go check out the Awarepreneurs community at awarepreneurs.com/community. And thank you, Awarepreneurs, for sponsoring this podcast. So Zack, let's talk a little bit about exactly what IndieSource does. What you were talking about there, I think you might, at the beginning, as you were starting to describe it there, I think you might call that product development, right? Like,
exactly.
I got this idea of a t-shirt or like some pants that, have a pocket that hold the thing that keeps my heart going. And I know what we need, but I've never done pants or a t-shirt. I've never done anything in the fashion world before. Help, who do I talk to? IndieSource's name is likely to be on the short list of people that pop up. Fair to say?
Yep. Yeah, I think so.
So how does that work?
So the first thing that we do is, because there's so many sort of questions and everybody's so different in what they want to create, we have what's called a kickoff meeting. And for folks that are know what they want to make and are ready to get started, but they just need that organization, we have them sit down for an hour with one of our brand consultants, and we literally hash out the whole thing. We talk about every style that they want to do, what kind of fabric they are envisioning. Sometimes they'll bring in actual swatches of fabrics that they have. They'll bring in reference samples. Right now we're doing everything virtually and it's working totally fine. So they just hold it up to the camera and show, oh, I love this stitching here. I love this fabric here. I like the print here. And we pull together things in reality that can help them to communicate what they want. Because remember, most of these people don't have fashion degrees. So we need a way for them to communicate to us what it is they're trying to achieve in language and in physical products so that we know what that is. And so throughout the course of that meeting, we establish all of those things from a product perspective, as well as the price points that they want to be selling it at, making it at, and all things related to their business. And at the end, the brand gets on really has a clear idea of, okay, this is what they want to make. And so from there, we put together a whole, statement of work for them. And we, give them the quote for their product development, and we begin the process. Once we start that process, they work with a project manager, who I mentioned before is an expert in the industry and does the actual sourcing. So they source the trim, the fabric, labels, any other vendors that are needed, and bring them back to our clients and say, here you go. You wanted these kinds of fabrics. Well, these are the options we got for you. This is what we like about this one. This is what we like about this one. And this one's a little bit more expensive, but here's why you should maybe consider this one, right? And so we're transparent about our sourcing, which is another thing that's really important, because a lot of people just be like, oh, your thing's done. So we want to give people their supply chain. So we'll say, okay, this is coming from this fabric vendor. This is coming from this trim guy. This is coming from this place. And so I think it's important because part of what we're trying to do is to eliminate that sketchy, archaic structure where nobody knows what's going on. And so we build a supply chain with you, and we create all of the little aspects that need to be pulled together on the material side first.
How much do you guys talk about impact and where things are sourced? Is that part of something that you're regularly, hey, if we get this fabric, here's our best sense of what that means for the environment or the people who grow that cotton. And if we go with route B, here's our sense of that. Is that part of the conversation you guys do?
Yeah, and we have certain people on our team that have expertise in that, right? So I'll literally connect them with those consultants that are the best at that and can communicate what that impact is, which is really, really cool. And then there's the obvious thing, which is that we basically only source domestically. So most of the stuff that we're especially on the knit side, most of the stuff is made in the US. So the impact, you just know, right? Okay, it's not being shipped from somewhere far away. So there's different parts of the supply chain where you can sort of dig in deeper and then figure out what do you want to be able to measure, and then how do you want to tell that story, and what's important to you. And because of the way that we do it, where you just you have this team around you, you can spend as much or as little time as you want in each area until you get what you need, so that you feel okay, this is the kind of fabric we want because of these things. And then now we can move to pattern making and sample making.
So you work on the product development, you customize it, you got this fabulous team of, I would imagine, Zack, I could be wrong, but I would imagine that, let's say somebody works for pick your famous brand in fashion, and they're somebody who cares about what's happening in the planet, and they're like, oh, I kind of like clothes, but boy, I know that in some ways this company I'm working for is part of the problem. And then they hear about Indie Source. I'd imagine that there's a bunch of people who know what they're doing that want to work for a company like you guys. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and we're hiring. So
you are. Oh, that's great to know. Cool. All right.
Yeah. We've been hiring. We need more project managers because, again, we have more people that are looking to start clothing lines. So it's just a matter of finding the best people out there and putting them into our system and making sure that they have the tools to be successful and to help these brands get their product to market. Right. So, yeah.
So you got these great people who know what they're doing, or really values aligned with what you're doing, and they know the industry, and they sit down and, okay, you can do this for the collar, and we get this fabric for this product. Maybe, here's a couple choices, and here's the impact of doing it all this way, right? And then you actually come up with a plan to actually produce this thing. Talk about the production part of what Indie Source does.
Yeah. So then, once the product is actually complete and approved, and everything is all right. We made that sample, and it's so important that you get that sample right before you go and produce multiple.
Oh, talk about that moment, like when an entrepreneur actually has that first, Rod Carew got his first T-shirt, right? What was that like?
It's the best, especially because a lot of times we have people in our fitting room, like physically there. So like we've caught many aha moments on camera where like, nice, like, you see it, they see it for the first time and they're like, wow, like, oh, this is actually the thing I've been thinking about for 6 years. And like, now it's like, I'm wearing it. Like, oh my gosh.
That's gotta be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the most gratifying like parts of the process. And especially because the team's there, right? Like Lana, our pattern maker, who like, she's engineering the fit. It's super hard what she does. Like there's not that many people in the world that can do patterns at the level that she can. And so for her and for everybody, like, it's just so cool to have that. We have on our Slack channel, we have a positive feedback. So anytime she's in a meeting and like, fitting goes great, like she always shares and the whole team celebrates because it's important that we have that like feedback loop.
Nice. So you have this production cycle and you like get a trial and then it's like, okay, I'm ready to scale it. Rod Carew is ready to make that, that shirt. And one of the things that you do that's different is you don't go out and like put an order for 500,000. You can small batch things and do it in an iterative way. I hadn't heard of that before.
Yeah. So we do it in pretty small batches. I mean, our minimum is usually around 300 pieces, but we break that down into different sizes and colors. So a lot of times you're talking about like only 20 units to 30 units per SKU, per unique item. And so that puts brands in a position to have a margin, but also like, they don't have so much that they can't sell it, right? It's like it's a really good amount. And what we do is we run the whole production process. We'll get the fabric, do the marking and grading, do cutting, sewing, printing, trimming, folding and packing, putting into that bag. A lot of our brands are like, which is great. Like, let's use a sustainable bag instead of a plastic bag. And so there's different things that they can decide what they want to use for the packaging. And then, and then we ship it to them or their distribution center. And then they typically, most of our brands are selling online. And so they're selling direct to consumer, which is really, really cool. And that's kind of like the third part of what we offered. So, as time has gone on and we reach out to our brands, hey, how's it going? Are you selling products? Do you need another reorder? We just, we noticed that a lot of brands do need support with marketing. And I did the same thing I did in the other situations. I just pulled together the best people in the industry and I brought them under our roof to support with marketing and those other initiatives. And so now we've launched the marketing side where we're helping brands with specifically building fashion websites, doing fashion advertising on Facebook and Instagram, and doing photography like literally across the hall from where we make the product. And
that's the newest part of what you're doing at IndieSource, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep. We just launched the marketing side.
From the idea, the first concept, hey, I've been thinking of, and fill in the blank, to like, here's what it would look like, to here's, exactly this factory is going to make it with these fabrics, to then here's the website and here's your strategy, here's your pictures and your strategy to sell. That's pretty inclusive, right? And how long have you guys been running?
7 years, I think, 7 at this point.
And over 500 entrepreneurs you've worked with in those 7 years.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, that's fabulous. So when you look at compared to 7 years ago, what's the status of like an impact or ethical fashion entrepreneur? Like, have you moved the needle for somebody who's got an idea like this? Can they get things to market faster? Can they learn how to, market more quickly? Are you seeing a increase in the number of folks who, have, let's say, fabrics that are more sustainably produced, or there's more business coming into factories in the U.S. that do this work as compared to 7 years? What are some of the positive impacts of all this work over the past 7 years?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen more sustainable fabrics, and I've been pushing for those for a long time, right? Like, I mean, when I was originally asking for more sustainable fabrics from our vendors, like, they just didn't have anything. I mean,
they looked at you funny, right?
They had
what? You're kidding, right?
They're like, what is that? I don't know. We're not going to sell organic anything, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's been one really cool thing because that's like easily measurable. Like I won't say every, but many, many fabric vendors now have different sustainable options. And I think part of, now we can't make them, I'm not a mill, but ultimately I think like us and all of my project managers constantly asking for it probably has an impact over time. So, and then because we're like, hey, look, this is something we want to buy.
All right, 500 companies want to buy stuff like this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's been really, really cool to see. I think over the past 7 years, things have just gotten easier in terms of the ability to market to your customer. I think Facebook advertising has gotten better in terms of its ability to reach the right person. I think that Shopify has gotten much better in terms of their usability and ability to just run campaigns. And so all of the technologies that you need to be a direct consumer business has gotten better over the years. And so now plugging that into our ability to just work with entrepreneurs and speed up the process, you're never going to get away from the fear. I mean, I'd be lying if I was like, oh yeah, just like that. Like we're talking about humans and many humans who have never started a business before. So there's a lot of fear. There's often backpedaling and, I don't know if I want to do, there's tons of that normal human stuff that we have to deal with every single person because they're solo entrepreneurs. They're doing it themselves. They're trying to make a difference. So we're there to guide them and support them. And at the end of the day, they have to take the jump themselves.
What would you say? Certainly that fear is, we could spend the whole hour, Zach, talking about the fear of kind of making the leap as an entrepreneur. What would you say, particularly somebody who has a fashion and something that has positive impact, intention to be more inclusive in the fashion in the fashion sector, and they have their idea, but they've never done it before, and they're just like right on the verge. Okay, I'm listening to this podcast and I know that I got an idea, but I've never done anything and I'm going to need to spend time and money up front and this is scary. And what would you say to somebody who's in that space?
Well, especially if you know that you're going into it to make a positive difference, you that's got to be your ammo all the way, right? And you have to use that kind of hunger and fire to get you through the different stages of of scariness and fear. And so there are going to there's no business that's created without some level of risk, right? So there's going to be risk. It is a product business. But I think the good advice that I can give you is that when you go into an industry that has been doing things a certain way a long time, there's going to be people that tell you that you can't do something. Like, that's not how it works, or this isn't the way we do it here, right? And my advice is just that's not true, right? Like, you should listen to them and you should hear them so that you know what current state is. Hey, this is current state. This is how it's done. But that is not how it needs to be. And so I encourage anybody that's sort of excited to get into a new industry, because when I started, I was really young when I started this company. So I had people because most people in this industry are older. In the garment industry, the average age is a little bit older, in the manufacturing side at least, right? Not on the front end side. And so then I got so much stuff. I was grilled left and right by people saying, oh, who are you? You're not good enough. This is how it is. And, you just have to sort of take it, enjoy it, and move to the next thing. All right, cool. Got it.
Reminds me a little bit of the publishing industry, right? Like the publishing industry is this is the way it's done for so long until the whole thing collapsed because now it's so disrupted that it's almost unrecognizable to what it was 10 or 20 years ago. It seems like fashions, especially, it was already on a track.
It's collapsing. It's already collapsing.
Yeah,
right
due
now.
to
so
COVID.
It's dude, the industry is collapsing. So don't let anybody tell you that it needs to be a certain way. The thing isn't working. Look at it. It's broken. Brands are going into bankruptcy every 5 seconds.
And it already was in a space of pretty significant disruption. And then, how could we have a conversation about the fashion industry without talking about what's happening right now between the combination of COVID-19 and people more working from home, and you're not doing that business travel. So maybe, can't do a wedding with 500 people in the same way. So people, wouldn't go out and necessarily buy that new dress. All these things have changed.
Right. Yep. Different products are being sold at different rates. That's for sure.
Yeah. So how is that impacting IndieSource and the entrepreneurs you work with?
It's different products are being sold. So it doesn't matter to me because I'm trying to support people who want to make products that are needed, right? So I don't care whether we're making fancy dresses for going out, or if it's like more something comfortable for staying in that regard, right? So, but I think, yeah, you're going to have to, as a brand, consider the realities of what people are doing and what they want to buy.
Most people are still wearing clothes, right?
They're wearing clothes. Yeah, everyone's going to wear clothes. It's just the question is, what are they going to wear?
What are they going to wear? And what again, before we hit the record button, that we talked the values, and you referenced the food industry not too long ago. We did an interview with Missy Singer talking about women in food, and both women growing food and women chefs, and how people are thinking about food has pretty significantly changed due to this crisis, this confluence of crises. And what I heard you say even more before we hit the record button is that how people are thinking just about everything, but including the clothes they're wearing. It's like, it matters more. And what you're wearing, you're not out there, going to the mall in the same way, looking for that new pair of shoes or that new cool hat or those new pair of sneakers. You're thinking you're buying more online because people aren't spending as much time in malls, and they're not shopping quite as much for entertainment. And now it's about values and what kind of world do I want to live in? And these really poignant times before I hit that buy now button, I'm thinking about, what does this mean? And do I feel a sense of connection to the why behind this product? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially since COVID has happened, that the shift is, it's so evident because it's literally the opposite, right? So nobody wants to see an influencer on an island anymore talk about how awesome they are and how they are, they have the
right,
coolest
here's my
clothing.
Sports car, right?
Right? Like nobody wants to see that. Like people want to back like businesses and products where they like know what's going on, and and look, like just with we talked about the mask that we did, like right now it's not about looking great. It's about being safe, feeling comfortable. And, that's about it right now.
Actually, we didn't talk about the mask. We talked about it before we hit record. Tell a story about what you guys are doing with masks.
Okay. So, yeah, California was really early to shut down. And it was like smack in the face. We were like, oh my gosh, like, we have to just close? Like, how does this work? So, we kind of very, very quickly pivoted to making reusable face masks. And it was so crazy because I literally I had made this pivot the same day I walked into a Trader Joe's, I kid you not, and nobody was wearing masks, like none of the employees, not even the guy at the counter. And I asked, I was like, how come you guys aren't wearing masks? And they were like, because the CDC said it's dangerous. That actually happened. And I was like, oh my God, this doesn't make sense. And of course, a week later, the CDC changed their mind, and then the whole mask thing happened. But it was early enough that I was just like, man, this is weird. Like, I'm just going to start making masks because this doesn't make sense. This is going to have to change. You guys
are really early to that, and making them in the US and making them in a way that all the values like that. That's actually how we connected. Your PR person reached out and sold me this story. And I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah. So we literally just used stock fabrics that we had. And, I already have my whole development team. So pattern maker created a pattern for the mask. My sample team made the sample. My whole team got together, and we worked with a doctor that somebody knew, and we're like, hey, is this the right way? Like, what would you want it to do? What should we make sure we don't leave out? And sort of collaborated with her on it and put together a mask that was woven, that had a pocket for a filter, that had pleats on the side, and, protected your chin and all that kind of stuff. And so we built this prototype and just wanted to practice what we preach in terms of getting to market. So we were like, let's just make a website. So we made a website, or we made a subsection of our website and put it on, just started selling it. And it was insane. I don't know. We didn't really anticipate how crazy it would be, but there was no supply chain out of China. So again, back to that 2% thing, right? Remember, 98% isn't done here. So now you have 98%, you have 100% of the country that needs something from the 2%, because we're the ones that have access and ability to make it quickly. We weren't the only ones that did it. A lot of other manufacturers started making masks. But again, think about how much demand there was at that moment. We're only 2%.
Love that you're willing to iterate quickly, and you know what it's like to bring this mindset, Zack. I'm like to joke, our listeners know about my spiritual highlighter. So I'm going to pull out my spiritual highlighter. So listeners, what you might notice is that Zack and his team have been thinking about the kind of impact and sourcing, and they know that there's a certain segment of the clothing market that is thinking about these kind of things. And then when a situation comes along like COVID-19 and hardly anybody's making masks in the US, first of all, I remember a time it was really hard to even get a mask, even from China. And you guys kind of were early on that. You said,
Right.
Let's try this. You didn't completely blow up your entire business model and stop doing the other things, but you said, let's try this. And what you saw is pretty quickly, it got a lot of traction. You put some PR people on it. Again, we wouldn't be here. You told that story really well, enough to land you on a podcast that gets 300 pitches a week, and we only do 2 episodes. So this was a yes, we had never met before. And I heard that story and I'm like, let's tell that story, right? So
boom, there we go.
There you go. Boom.
Process,
and you guys
right?
are off and running. And so, listeners, I just want to kind of make that visible of what, get to know a certain space, get to understand what your values are and who shares those values, and then be lean startup 101, and then be willing to iterate, right? And you guys that have already been up and running, you're working with 500 entrepreneurs, not like you're a brand new startup, but you're still willing to try some new things without putting every single ounce of energy into this one thing, but you iterated quickly and boom, that took off, and that brought you lots of other good things like more publicity for everything that IndieSource is doing, not just selling a bunch of masks, right? So listeners can't highlight that enough. What a fabulous example, Zack, of what you're doing, but also how you're approaching doing impact businesses in this kind of leaner, let's know what our values are, but let's be flexible and try some things in terms of how we're showing up in the marketplace, and let's let the marketplace help inform where we go next. I can't recommend that enough, especially in these times of a lot of change. So, Zack, anything you're thinking about, with this space? You're 7 years, you've been on the kind of front lines of things changing in this dinosaur industry. What are you thinking about going forward with IndieSource now?
Well, I want to be able to make more impact, and I want to do it thoughtfully. And so I think one of the things that really sucks is when you build a brand and you help them to, come to life and market them, and then they go to another manufacturer overseas because they're cheaper.
Yeah.
That really stings. But I don't want to just do that in the same way. I've manufactured overseas. We even started overseas. And so I'm thinking now about how can we implement the sort of values that we have here, but do it in a smart, sustainable way in countries, other countries. I'll give you an example. So right now we have this great facility in Mexico. It's the closest country we can have next to the US. And I'm in the process of getting them fair trade certified because that's really, really important. And I'm only going to be using that for brands that are in the United States. That's very different, than the conversation where we have a lot of Australian brands that'll reach out to me and say, hey, we want to produce a USA made. I'm like, why? I get that sounds good, but I don't want to ship something to Australia from here. That's crazy. Well, it's not really crazy. It's what happens every day. And so I'm sort of thinking about supply chain in a new way. It's how can we do lean manufacturing, quick turn production, and create different hubs around the world that allow us to support not just America, but the world. I studied international business. I'm obsessed with international development and helping communities. It doesn't matter what country they're from. And so I think that we're going to be focusing a lot more on setting up different hubs and also just getting a little bit higher up on the supply chain so that we can really know exactly what's going into each product that we make and being able to measure that. So I'm working with some of even our brands to figure out how do we measure what we're doing from an impact perspective on the fabric level? How do we measure different things in terms of the environment? So that's a goal for me. And the more brands that we have that partner with us, the more we're able to do that and make it extremely beneficial for everybody.
Beautiful. Thanks for being a leader in the ways that you are, Zack. Zack, I could hang out all day and talk to you. I wouldn't do that to you, and I wouldn't do that to our listeners. If there was something that you were hoping we'd get to in this topic of inclusion and sustainable fashion that we either haven't yet talked about, or you want to leave a couple of key ideas with our listeners as we say goodbye, what would that be?
No, just take action. I mean, the world just doesn't change on its own. It's not, you can, I think, if anything, this experience of COVID has shown everybody, like even the leaders of the world don't always know what's going on, right? So we can't just let the leaders do their thing. We have to each be leaders in our own communities. And so if there's something you've been thinking about doing or you have questions about, like take action on that thing, get started, get it to a validation point, talk to people, get feedback, and put yourself in a position to really know whether the thing that you're making is a true need or just a perceived need. And then from there, you've kind of validated that and you can start to scale your business. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Zack, thanks for being on the show. It's been such an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
So we'll put a link to all these great resources and some of the examples of products, their Instagram, and lots of other good things. I want to say thank you, everybody, for listening. Before we go, just a quick reminder, we now drop episodes twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday, early in the morning, about 5 a.m. Eastern. If you have an idea, we love listener-suggested topics and guests. So if you have an idea, go to the Awarepreneurs website and use our contact page and tell us what's your idea. For now, I just want to say thank you for listening. Please take really good care in these poignant times, and thank you for the positive impact that you're having in our world.